Well, good evening and welcome to our first Q&A for 2018. My name's Nick Zoomerin, your host and moderator for this evening. Our Q&A event is an initiative of the university's Institute for Ethics and Society. That's the banner over here. And we have three key areas of research: moral philosophy, ethics education, religion and global society, and bioethics and healthcare ethics. The Institute also informs curriculum, offers consultancy and training services, and aims to foster ethical and social awareness through its public engagement events such as this one, Mindfulness and Modern Life. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our guests. We have to the left Dr. Greg Bottaro, all the way from New York. So he's made quite a trip just to come over. He's over for a few things, and we'll be talking about those soon. But Dr. Bottaro is a clinical psychologist practicing in Connecticut, serving the greater New York metropolitan area, and many others through online therapy. He received his doctorate in clinical psychology from the Institute for the Psychological Sciences, a graduate school in Arlington, VA, that integrates Catholic philosophy and theology with sound, empirically validated psychology. Before finishing his degree, he discerned a religious vocation with the community of the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal. He lived 4 years in the Bronx, serving the poor in the tradition of St. Francis, and these were emotionally, spiritually and professionally formative for Dr. Bottaro, tested his vocation and ultimately felt the prompting of God's will to pursue family life. 6 years after leaving NYC as a friar, he returned as a psychologist. His aim is fundamentally the same: to serve. Instead of serving those suffering material poverty, he now seeks to serve those with psychological needs. Dr. Bottaro formed the CatholicPsych Institute in 2012 to connect Catholics around the world with therapists, trained to integrate the faith with the practice. There are many different types of psychological needs. Catholic psych therapists are trained to provide treatment for the worst types of people suffering, as well as provide therapeutic atmosphere to gain insight to some of life's basic adjustment and issues. Elizabeth Shaw is a clinical and counselling psychologist, couple and family therapist, who is the CEO at Relationships Australia, New South Wales. For over 25 years, Elizabeth has worked with couples, families, teams and organisations on relational stress and relational resilience. In addition, Elizabeth has taught in a number of master's programs in areas of clinical practice, clinical supervision, professional ethics and identity management and leadership, and has published a body of work in these areas, with a particular emphasis on relational ethics and its role in strong, healthy connections. Elizabeth is senior consultant at the Ethics Centre and holds a number of board positions. Professor Peter Smith is a medical oncologist with 35 years experience treating children and adolescents with cancer. He was Stevenson Professor and Chair of the Department of Paediatrics at the University of Melbourne, Dean of Medicine, University of Auckland, New Zealand, and most recently Dean of Medicine at UNSW Australia for 10 years. He is immediate past President of Medical Deans ANZ, the peak body representing Australia and New Zealand medical schools. Professor Smith was recently a non-executive director of St. Vincent's Health Australia, a national hospital group, and was chaired of the Board of Safety and Quality Committee, providing oversight of clinical performance of the group's hospitals for 6 years. He's currently Executive Chairman of Avexia Care, establishing cancer survivorship clinics in Australia, and a consultant to the Association Academic Centre International, Washington, DC. Professor Smith teaches mantra meditation to medical students as part of their personal and professional development program. Father Aloysius immigrated with his family from Burma. He joined the Discussed Carmelites in Australia, and after ordination and postgraduate studies, he spent some years teaching theology at the Yarra Theological Union in Melbourne. He's also been involved in retreat ministry. He's published a book on Saint Therese of Lisieux entitled Holiness for All, and most recently a book on Saint Teresa of Avila titled Saint Teresa and the Our Father, a Catechism of Prayer. In a moment, I'll go to the first questions, which have been sent in by you, the audience. But first, I'd like to just start with each of the panelists because you're all in some form of area that deals with a lot of mental health distress. So if you could just, in your own areas, perhaps through your institute and your work through Relationships Australia, New South Wales, Avexia and the Retreat Centre, tell us, what do you find is the most challenging area today, or for you perhaps, with what you're seeing in mental health?
Sure, you like me to start?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's a great question, and interestingly enough, even though I direct the CatholicPsych Institute, and a good number, most if not all of our patients at any given time are Catholic, what I find to be sort of at the root of most suffering is a loss of meaning in the world today. And so a lot of children are growing up in an environment where either through cynicism or just lack of direction or good education, at the human level, there's not a sense of who God is. And so there's an American psychologist named Martin Seligman who has initiated this field called positive psychology. And he's discovered that there are these 5 qualities that create resilience, especially to trauma. And one of those 5 qualities is a system of meaning in which there is a higher power, not just any higher power, but one that knows us personally and cares about us enough to take care of the problems in the world, so that we have the sense that it doesn't all rest on our shoulders. And what I've found is that a lot of the root causes of whether they're anxiety disorders or depressive mood disorders, and a multitude of other family dynamics and systemic issues, there's this loss of a system of meaning. And so we're all sort of aimless, floating around, trying to make the best of things that we can. And for the most part, we get along okay until push comes to shove, and we're really pushed and stressed. And that's when things start to fall apart. So to kind of be able to sort of bring it all together and summarize sort of a root generalization, I'd say that's where I'd see the biggest problem.
Thank you, Greg. Elizabeth?
Well, I guess to take another angle, I would see that relationship distress is a key part of struggle, because we are relational beings. And when we become distressed or disenfranchised or lost or lonely, it's usually in relation to people or connections that we either have, wish we had, used to have. And certainly for people who seek out employee assistance programs at work, or people who have some sort of crisis, it's often centred around some sort of worry about who they are in relation to others, sometimes who they are in relation to themselves, but certainly so often about how do I have really good connections, how do I matter to someone, how can people matter more to me, and how can I be a good person, and also look after myself and not get lost in somebody else. How can I be a separate self and still be together with others? You know, these sorts of questions about self and other are very pervasive in the work I do, but also are pivotal in why people seek help. And we know that good relationships are a moderating variable for whether people have further mental health issues, whether they return to jail, whether children thrive. You know, relationships are implicated in almost any resilient or successful action or stage. So for me, that's what's really important.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Professor Peter?
Thank you. Well, I'll look at it through a slightly different lens, and I can see one of the huge problems we have today in the world is what I'll call distractedness. One of the problems, of course, are these things, and you know, everybody, I mean, I came in on the train, everybody on the train was on their mobile, doing something on the phone, not even communicating with anybody. To give you an example of where this has gone and going, I'll just refer briefly to the time I was on the St Vincent's board and chaired the Safety and Quality Committee. We had oversight of the clinical performance. We saw the good, the bad and the problems. The problems we saw, without going into great detail, were really a result of clinical staff being distracted, not the issue of them being incompetent. We train Notre Dame, other medical schools, nursing schools, train very, very competent doctors and nurses. But the issue was distractedness that leads to lack of awareness, lack of attention to what people are doing, and perhaps even more importantly, lack of attention to themselves, to their colleagues, and to the significant people in their lives. And I think this is a major issue, this distractedness, the speed at which things are happening, and the way that we tend to be fragmented into sort of our own little ego.
Thank you, Peter. Father?
Well, the people that come out to the retreat center, they come to speak about issues to do with their search for God and their relationship with God. And generally speaking, you could divide them up into two groups. For some, they come out because this search for God has been provoked by some negative experience in their lives. It could be a relationship issue, could be grief, it could be loneliness. With the second group, they come out there simply because there's a deep discontentment in their life. There's a lack of sufficient meaning. Like Greg said, a meaninglessness in their lives. They may be physically and materially comfortable, yet they experience this deep void, this deep lack in their lives. So I believe that underlying these two groups of people is their search reveals to me a kind of deep existential insecurity, a lack of rootedness, a lack of groundedness in something larger than their present reality. So when they come out to the retreat center, they are seeking to understand their life, their experiences in a broader frame, a broader context. And so they raise questions like, is there something more than what I am experiencing at present? How can I make sense of my existence? How can I make sense of my experiences in a way that transcends this life? So it's that search for something more.
Thank you, Father. Mm-hmm. We might go to our first question for this evening then. It's actually on technology, this phone you pulled out before, and it's from Chiro. So if we could get a mic over to Chiro.
My question for tonight is related to technology. So how much is technology distancing humans from their true nature, the inner selves we are, the inner selves we are meant to be, thinking creatures? Is technology taking away our motivation to discover and reflect on our own values, our virtues, and our purpose in life?
Okay, I might actually throw it to Greg on this one, given that the first part of your bio there was that you did a lot of online mindfulness. So, yeah, I mean, what do you think about the use of technology then, whether it's phone or online or anywhere else?
Sure. I think the prevalence of technology now is what's created the need for mindfulness to become such a fad and such an important practice. And I think, and I certainly wasn't around for it, but it seems like 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when we were an agrarian culture, being out in the dirt and planting and walking and taking care of animals and sort of doing things that were connecting us to nature, to our environment, and to each other. We're dependent on the sunlight. We're dependent on those earthy things. We were connected to what's happening here and now. And I had a professor who theorized that there's this difference between the analog and the digital experience of humanity. And the analog is this sort of direct interaction, whereas the digital is everything is transformed into ones and zeros and then represented. So we never really get reality as it is. We always get it through this kind of interpretation. And now we have the phones, the technology, and it's a literal digitalization of reality. And so in my courses, I often have people hold up their phone, and I say, actually hold your phone and look at your phone. And actually, let's spend 5 minutes exploring this object in your hand. Have you ever seen your phone? Look at the back side of it, not the screen, but study the way light reflects off different angles. And look at the scratches and the way that it picks up texture. spend only 5 minutes actually being with your phone, and all of a sudden you realize that you've never seen your phone. And so, yes, it absolutely, the technology has created the problem because it separates us. Now, I embrace technology as well, so we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're not saying technological advance in general is a negative or an evil or anything like that. I mean, a washing machine is technology. Roads are technology. We have to think about how we're talking about things. But the kinds of technology and the way that we give ourselves away to them are what's causing these problems. And so it's removing us from our humanity, and it is causing psychological disorder. And so now we have the need to reintroduce artificially periods of time during the day when we're just being ourselves with the present moment and connecting in those ways and avoiding the distractibility that was talked about earlier.
Thanks, Greg. Elizabeth, what are you seeing? Are things like sort of Facebook and anxiety or things like these, are these overstated? Is actually happening? What are you seeing in your experience?
Well, maybe to be a bit devil's advocate on this, that I suppose looking back, every advance, there's always been people who mourn that advance, who say that whatever that advance is causing the problems in society, and yet for the younger generations this is the society that they're in. So I think for those of us who say this is some sort of something to be disappointed in, or perhaps is causing us problems, I'm not sure what problems it's causing us as such. So I guess the premise of the question is difficult, because what is the problem that it's causing? I think, like anything, if you do too much of something to the point that it creates impairment in your life, that's usually the clinical threshold. You know, if someone comes to, you know, if they're seen to have some sort of mental health impairment, then one of the elements is are you doing this thing, whether it's be on your phone or whatever it might be, to the point where it's impairing other things in your life. You're unable to work, you're unable to sleep, or then it's seen to be too much. But I think otherwise, this is the new normal. This is the life that we have. I'm not sure that it's the cause of anything in particular. It's not. I don't know that I could say pervasively it's the cause of being less in touch with oneself. I think the nature of society and what we expect from a meaningful life has changed quite dramatically. I think the desire to be energetically engaged, and the demands of work and the way in which we're expected to be on top of things. It's often talked about the news cycle. You need to be up to date. You need to be updated every couple of minutes about what's happening. You know, there's something about the way society is moving, which is about communication and information that is then, you know, technology is one vehicle for that demand. So the society we live in is demanding, but that's also what makes it exciting. I think certainly we often talk about technology as a disconnector, but in fact, when I observe for my children, and in fact my own behaviour, it's an incredible connector. You know, that my children, compared to me at the end of a school day ringing one friend for a couple of hours to discuss everything that happened, which was so terribly important, she's on a chat with 15 friends, and they're having a fine old time talking and planning and ruminating, and yes, it's too much in a 15-year-old in that. You know, you can say things off the cuff and they're in writing, and you can get very, oh my God, she said she's not coming on Saturday. Is that, I'm not coming on Saturday? Or is that, oh, I'm not coming on Saturday? You know, there's all of that happens for a 15-year-old, which is quite disturbing for her. But it's an incredible connector. It's an enabler of, you know, the world has opened up, that any information is at your fingertips, and that's, you know, we're connected globally in a way that we never anticipated. It's so incredibly exciting. So I think to lament it, we have to be careful of that we're not just the people who are sad about life moving on, as which our parents did that. There were people who thought the jukebox was the ruination of, you know, we don't want to go down that track.
Peter, I'll get, seeing as you brought it up, and with the first one to pull out the phone, get it be on your phone. Do you think that it's some tendency towards addiction, perhaps, that it is? What do you, or is it a cause, the phone technology, of some of our problems?
I mean, clearly, as has been already observed, there are good things about it, but I mean, I am concerned that it is leading to a fragmentation. That originally it thought this would bring people in contact with each other, but I mean, I'm not seeing that. It's allowing groups to form small, like-minded groups. We're not seeing, in many ways, a spread of ideas. It's become a medium, I think, also for one to project one's ego and one's brand, and you know, how many likes did I have on Facebook, or etc., etc. I'm concerned about it, but I do agree it's not going to go away, so we have to find ways to embrace it and work with them. And if we don't, certainly our children are embracing it.
Father, is it no phones at the retreat centre, or what? What's the rule?
Well, unfortunately, it has come into the retreat centre too, but you know, certainly technology has done, there's a lot of positive things to technology, and especially social media. There's that sense of connectedness with people. It broadens our experience, knowing about others, but it's the addiction to it, it's the abuse of technology and the social media that is of concern. Because I do think it keeps us at a certain distance from our own selves. We're so connected up with other people's lives that do we take time to reflect on our own lives? And I must say, I'm not a consumer of the social media. I don't have Facebook or Twitter or any of that, and it's only from hearsay. And I am told that people on Facebook, they fabricate their image and manufacture their image. I mean, what is that saying about owning themselves and getting to know themselves and their own self-esteem when you have to do that? You know? So it seems to me that social media keeps us connected with the external and superficial aspects of life. It does not allow us to go in and get to know ourselves better and own ourselves as created by God.
So possibly a barrier there, making it a little bit difficult,
Possibly,
but not necessarily the cause of all evil, according to Elizabeth. If you do have a question along the way, please feel free to pop your hand up. I might just, we had a question on this one. Yeah, can we get a mic over to the gentleman at the front here? No, that's okay. Just if it was on this topic as well.
Yeah. Is it on? Yeah? Yeah, so I've got a general question about, well, it's more about sort of something like trust. It seems that part of the way in which, you're talking about fragmentation. Despite all this supposed connectedness that we have, there does seem to be a kind of general disintegration of trust between people, or between people and institutions. There's the sort of, I don't know, the old line about politicians, right? No one trusts them, all that kind of stuff, right? We don't trust what all this connectedness is bringing us, right? So I'm just wondering, well, particularly in the context of religious belief, whether that's had an effect there as well. Right? We don't trust authority figures because we don't trust what they're saying to us, right? We don't trust our religious institutions. We don't trust our political institutions. We don't trust our families. So all those kinds of, all those sorts of social institutions which were kind of bearers of meaning, if you will, traditionally speaking, have been undermined. So I'm just wondering what you think technology's role has been in that, and whether there's any way to kind of
Is technology
yeah,
breaking
to
up
deal
trust,
with it.
so to
Yeah.
speak? Yeah. Who would like to weigh in on the issue of trust in technology? Elizabeth, did you have some thoughts?
Yes, well, I was just reading about the Edelman Trust Index that's just been the 2018. I don't know if you saw that. So, talking about this very topic. Look, clearly, I think technology and the advances around technology have put on display very quickly. If there's anything to be found out, we found it out and heard about it from 15 different means very, very quickly. So I think that you know, the preponderance of evidence that comes at you about failures in institutions does mean that you're not protected from that in any way. So I think that demands from us more critical analysis on our own parts about the information that we're getting, but also, rather than get caught up in the anxiety around that, about I can't trust anyone, is more to say, well, maybe I need to have a deeper and more involved engagement around trust. What is it that I'm expecting and demanding, and how do I want that represented, and also what's my own role in institutions? You know, in what way might I advocate for things? Might I vote in elections in a way that gets me more of what I need around trustworthy behaviour? So I think seeing that, if technology has a role in bringing that to us, but if we take up the challenge, it demands more from us to build a better society.
Peter, did you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other issue is the anonymity of it. That I mean, in the past, if you wanted to have a go at somebody, you had a go at them, but they knew you were having a go at them, and you had to deal with that too. Whereas now, you can put stuff out there in an anonymous way, and some of it can be very, very damaging, and I think that's one of the issues with it. And I'm not quite, I mean, I think some of the, you know, the Googles and the whatever of the world are trying to address this. I'm not sure how they will, but I think that is part of the problem.
We might jump into now a more specific topic of mindfulness, which is the sort of key topic of this evening. We have a question from Anutu. Is Anutu, would you like to put your, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Anutu, it's on Zen Buddhism. If you'd like to put your hand up, we'll just stand up and we'll get a mic over to you.
So my question is about mindfulness, so specifically mindfulness as a therapy in modern psychology. It has its root in Zen Buddhism. So is it spiritually safe for a Catholic to practice mindfulness, given its root? And also, if that is the case, then in what specific context?
Okay, thank you. So yeah, is it safer for a Catholic to practice mindfulness, and what are the roots of mindfulness? I might throw it to Greg. I've seen you speaking on this, I think, on YouTube.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I'll throw it to Greg first.
That's an easy lob right there. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely what I've been spending the last 2 years sort of developing and understanding, because it has become a big issue. And the research is incredible in terms of the effect, the outcomes. And so we do have an obligation as seekers of truth to sort of discover why this works and how it works and what this means for our human flourishing. And so looking a little bit deeper, we can see a couple of things. The protocol that's typically the object of study in these research projects is called the mindfulness-based stress reduction. And that's an 8-week protocol developed by John Kabat-Zinn, a Buddhist who's a medical scientist from UMass Medical Center. And he developed this in 1979 to help his patients suffering with chronic pain, and discovered that by applying some of the sort of mental practices that he learned as a Buddhist to his patients, they were finding greater relief than from their medical management, even from morphine and things like that. So he developed this protocol, and then that was the standardized protocol that's been researched since 1979. And so there are thousands of studies that have been done, and it's gone from pain management to just astronomical lengths in terms of kinds of disorders that it can help. Everything from anxiety and mood disorders to eating disorders to ADHD, all sorts of parenting issues, marriage issues, and so on. So when we look at this a little bit more closely, we see 2 points that I like to make. Number one, the protocol itself is absent from a sort of a worldview to ground it in. And so that's the strict 8-week protocol. You don't get into the why of how it works. And that's a really important point, because to understand the way the mind works, we can go, we can gain from any explanation of truth from any worldview, from any walk of life around the world. It doesn't matter if it's Buddhist or atheist or Catholic. If it's true for the human person and for flourishing, it's part of truth, and we can gain something from that. Now, I'm particularly interested in understanding why. And so in my work and in my study, what I've come to is that there are 2 reasons why mindfulness works. So to kind of understand it simply, we're putting ourselves into a brain state. We're sort of overriding our fear response, our fight or flight response, to get into a brain state of safety, physiological safety. There's only really 2 reasons why we might be safe. Number 1, danger is an illusion in the first place. And that's the Buddhist answer. That safety is an illusion, death is an illusion, and ultimately we have to reach enlightenment where all is one. Or the other option is that we have a Father who loves us, who takes care of us, who protects us, who provides for us, that we can trust Jesus when he says, do not be anxious, be worried about the things of your life. Look at the birds and the air and the flowers in the field. The Father provides for them. That is the foundation for why we know we're safe. And so we can practice the module, the protocol, and allow ourselves to put ourselves into a state of physiological safety because we believe that we actually are in fact safe. So when I'm guiding students through my course or helping people understand, like if you're looking out there for things to know what's safe practice, what's not safe practice, I would just say this. There's a lot of great material out there on mindfulness. You can look up on YouTube, you can find different exercises are out there and things like that. And a lot of it is pretty bland. It's just about paying attention to the present moment, non-judgmentally. Sometimes people move beyond that protocol and add in their own interpretation, and sometimes that comes from the Buddhist worldview. And so then they'll say, experience your oneness with the universe and realize that your sense of separateness is an illusion, or kind of goes in that direction to sort of develop the Buddhist mindfulness worldview. And so I would say that could be a bit confusing, because when you're in that state and you're in that space where you're really being open and present, and then all of a sudden these ideas are being introduced to your mind, that can be misleading and confusing, and that can sort of take root and lead you in different places. So to find the vanilla practices, or if you want to have the Catholic perspective, find a Catholic perspective. Practice. So when I'm teaching and leading the exercise, I ground it in prayer. I refer back to the Father who loves us, and we can still enter into the same brain state, which is healthy for us, and connect our faith with our emotional life, and actually flourish and feel peace and healing in that way. So there's absolutely a healthy and safe way to practice as a Catholic.
Father, do you see any?
Well, Greg responded to in a very similar way that I would. Like in the Carmelite, in Carmelite spirituality, mindfulness involves living in the present moment. It's being attentive to and being fully present in one's environment, in one's relationships and encounters with people, in the way one is performing one's in action done. And as we're aware, we're usually preoccupied and distracted by many things. And so we're not fully focused, we're not fully present in the here and now, where we can be haunted by our past or fearing our future. And of course, that bears on how we are living in the present. So in the Carmelite spirituality, mindfulness affirms that God is present in the here and now, and in every instant, in every moment of our lives. And we are invited to live our lives in relationship with the God who is here with us in the here and now. So that's the Carmelite, I suppose, the Catholic perspective on it.
What about you? You teach mindfulness through relationships in Australia, New South Wales. You have courses. Where does it draw its inspiration from, or what kind of mindfulness is?
Well, look, I guess in relation to the Buddhist traditions, in speaking to a number of Buddhist practitioners who do debate that the way that psychology has taken the practice as a tool that can be used sort of divorced from the thousands of years of background, says that it becomes in itself, yes, a useful tool, but also potentially quite shallow, as was said. So I think that, it has become a practice that's quite important in terms of the work of psychologists, absolutely, in terms of people being able to quieten themselves, particularly those with high levels of anxiety or panic or recovering from trauma. It's a very useful practice. But I agree that you can take it on as a centering technique, a tool, or you can make so much more of it depending how it fits into your belief system.
Okay, did you have a question? Yeah. Can we'll just get a microphone over to you.
Yes. What do you think regarding becoming a oneness in overall, and in terms of the spiritual beliefs, the spiritual sects? Do you think one needs to isolate from reference to the leadership in question if they have low mental health or low esteem, since your brain and cognitive ability in that situation is so unstable that it leads to brainwashing and manipulation being much higher? And do you think a much more self-determination route within spirituality is the most appropriate pathline in all sects under those circumstances? Okay,
thank you. So avoiding any particular spiritual and focusing more on the self-determination, if that follows the question. Yeah, what did anyone want to weigh in on this question first?
Look, I'm not sure that it's something that can be answered because it's in a way it's too big a question. It sounds a very important question because it really does depend on the individual. Like anything, it may result in some difficulties for some people, but for others is such a source of strength. And there are many pathways to feel strong and resilient. And so, I don't know that I could comment in terms of generally what would be good about that or not.
Peter had some comments on this one.
Yeah, look, I don't think I've actually explicitly declared this, but I actually have a mantra-based meditation practice. I meditate twice a day, and I do a silent retreat once a year. It is in the Catholic tradition. I'm originally taught by the Carmelites, but I follow at the moment the methods of John Main and Lawrence Freeman. I do teach meditation, which I think adds another dimension to mindfulness. Now, if you do take people into a meditation program, it does bring things up, and there are some people that do become quite disturbed by it. Most people not. Most people, it follows the process of sort of settling down your amygdala, activating your prefrontal cortex, you become calmer, blood pressure, all that settles. But there are some people where it does cause issues, and I think one has to be aware of that. And some people do actually need therapeutic, psychotherapeutic intervention to help them. I don't know that there's a explicit answer to what you've said, but I think one has to be very careful that when one embarks on this, there will be people who'll be vulnerable, and as I said, it does release things that sometimes do cause issues.
I do think that's a really important question, And I think in the world of mental health and accompanying people and walking with people suffering from mental health issues, freedom is essential. And as a Catholic psychologist, in developing a psychotherapy founded on Catholic anthropology, we have to see the dignity of the human person and the freedom in the human person as paramount. And so, as a Catholic therapist, I believe that the Catholic faith is the fullness of the truth, and I believe that part of that is that we're created with dignity in the image of God, and we're created for greatness in union with Him. Now, that doesn't mean that a person necessarily has to know that or think that or feel that at any given point along the journey. But if I believe that a person is created in such a way, then it kind of relieves the anxiety that I might have to convince anybody of that. If it's true, it doesn't have to be convinced. It doesn't have to be, sort of proselytized. And so helping a person to be a healthier version of themselves is going to necessarily, at least in my worldview, help a person move closer to their ultimate fulfillment. And at some point along the way, come to understand who they are in the universe, who they are in relationship with God, if there's a God and does God exist, or what does that mean for me? But it has to be done with freedom. And anything apart from that or against that is going to be manipulating and taking advantage of a person. And that is essentially against the dignity of the person. So I think that's a really important question to ask, and I think it's important for us as caregivers and people who lead or guide in any way to take that very seriously.
Thank you. We have the best part of 10 or 15 minutes. I can already see a few hands going up. I might go to, so just if you do have a question and you really want to get it in, we've got about 10 or 15 minutes. So Francine, if we could bring a microphone.
Primarily a question for you, Peter. As an oncologist, you've worked with people who have been dying, and surely death is something that terrifies us. I'd like to know how mindfulness can help us die.
How can mindfulness / perhaps meditation help us die?
I think, I think a meditation practice, and I'll speak of meditation, does bring you in contact with yourself and with a much larger reality, which we call God. And I think a meditation practice will bring or can bring you in contact, much closer contact with yourself and this greater reality. And I think that if you can achieve that state, we often talk about, cure versus being well. And I think that people can, in fact, die well if they are accepting of themselves and where they fit into the greater scheme of things.
We'll go to the question in the middle, the gentleman with the white shirt. If you'd just like to stand up and we'll get a microphone over to you, and then we'll go to the gentleman over here.
I just wanted to go back to kind of the key tenets of mindfulness that you were speaking about before. You talked about the idea of non-judgmental awareness. I'm familiar with that, kind of the present moment. As someone that's trained mostly in cognitive therapy, where I've been really acutely aware of people's impressions of their present moment and how important it is to make accurate judgments. I guess, how do we integrate that kind of idea of non-judgmentalness? I probably need kind of a 101 in just introduction to what we actually mean by that.
I might throw to Elizabeth first.
I don't know, it sounded like it was a question for you. Do you want to answer?
Sure.
I can answer. Okay. Yeah, I'll throw to Greg.
Sure, it's a great question. It's an incredibly complex answer, and you can go to CatholicMindfulness.com and you can sign up for my course.
Oh dear, if I knew he was going to say that, I wouldn't have thrown to him.
That's what happens.
So here's the thing that happens in mindfulness as you're learning it and in going into the journey of it, is you confront paradox. And this is something that I find that in the Buddhist protocol and the Buddhist explanation, it doesn't really do a good job of explaining this, and I don't think it ultimately can. But for instance, you start the program, people usually pick up mindfulness because they've judged there to be a problem. And then you're trying to solve the problem. And then you get into mindfulness and they say, well, you have to stop judging. Non-judgmental awareness. You're like, what the heck am I supposed to do with that? And so, somehow, and then you're supposed to not feel bad about yourself for thinking there was a problem in the first place, because don't judge yourself either. And you end up in a mess. So the way that I break it apart is to say this. Because we have a spirit that transcends our material body, that we're united to and still experience, we have sort of two dimensions here. We have a transcendent self that is in touch with objective truth. And at the same time, we have the immediate self that's in the moment. And at the same time, we can actually be aware of both. So you learn how to hold at once the awareness of both your transcendent awareness and choice, maybe, and judgment that you've made, that there's a problem that I need to be working through. But because of that, I'm making the immediate choice to turn away from my judgmental thoughts. Now, you can apply that same kind of paradigm to specific questions like with CBT. Now, with CBT, I love cognitive behavioral therapy. We use techniques in our practice, but it has its limitations. And one of them is you're constantly training yourself to judge everything. And if judgment is creating the problem mentality that's creating the anxiety disorder, the last thing you want to send a patient home with is a paradigm to start judging their thoughts. So sometimes we have to back away from CBT and recognize that that's not going to be helpful. But we can learn how to sort of be more in control of what we're doing with our focus. So if we're in a practice where we're doing mindfulness, we're using a mantra or doing whatever we're doing, we can choose to let go of those thoughts, turn away from them. If we're doing some deeper analysis, we might decide to figure out what the underlying thoughts are, the core beliefs are. But we are developing our freedom in having the ability to choose where we're placing our focus.
We have a question from the gentleman here in the black t-shirt. If we can get a microphone over, and then we have another question over here. Just right up the front here, please. Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to ask you, all of you, people at the panel and the audience, I heard about mindfulness. I'm not well educated like all of you, because my education is only high school, but I would like to ask you how to use the mindfulness kind of thing into the real life, like at work, for example. Let me tell you my background. I came here when I was 20, now I'm 43. I heard that Australia is like a dreamland, dream country for people like me. So I came here. For 12 years I've been waiting for my permanent resident, even though 10 years I've been illegal, and 3 months I was staying at the detention center. And 2 years after the detention center, I got, on the 12 years, I got my permanent resident. I thought that after I got permanent resident, life will be different, will be changing. But not really, actually. I still feel like a crap. Especially when I start working with city buses. I thought my life is already safe. Like, I got a good income, and all of a sudden I heard that bus being sold. So I got a problem, like I got a anxiety disorder because I got a mortgage to pay. So how do I use the mindfulness? Is there any kind of technique that I can learn from it? Or is there any network that I can hang out with it? So that's like practical things that I can ask you, like hopefully, I'm a Catholic by the way, but
Thank you. So a very practical question. How can mindfulness help us in a very practical
Well, from the Catholic Carmelite perspective, mindfulness, as I said, is about being aware that God dwells within us, firstly knowing that, being aware of that, being attentive to that. So for me, mindfulness is no matter what is happening to me, wherever I am, God is with me. And that's a strength, a comfort for me, that this God who knows me, loves me, is with me no matter what is happening. So in difficult situations, I go back and remind myself that in this difficult situation, I'm not alone. God is there with me, accompanying me. Does that help you? Yeah. Well, it's not imaginary, it's true for me. That's what I really believe, that God is with me. And that in His strength and with God, I can endure, I can overcome, I can continue to live meaningfully as best as life would allow me to. In other words, I don't despair. I can still live my life.
I want to be able to, thank you, Father, I want to be able to fit just a couple of more
Yep.
questions, but perhaps just if anyone wanted to respond to that in terms of the practical stresses of everyday life. Is mindfulness going to, you're going to do a bit of mindfulness and that you do it well and that's going to solve the everyday stresses? Is that possible? I mean, is that what we're talking about here?
Well, look, I think the way that mindfulness and meditation's talked about it almost does sound like it would help you with anything. You know, I think certainly in the practice of psychology, it's become very dominantly talked about as not just a tool, but almost a completely pivotal centre of everything. And I think clearly it has its limits and it's useful in some situations and not others. I think for people who are very distressed or agitated and sometimes feel overwhelmed, there are all sorts of things about being able to calm oneself and to be connected and reflect and call on sources of inspiration and comfort can be incredibly useful. But I guess what I often hear is, you know, people say to me, I've heard about this thing called meditation, or I've been practicing mindfulness. I'm not sure I'm doing it right. It doesn't seem to be helping me the way it helps other people. Maybe I'm missing something. And I think we've got to remember that meditation, for example, can come in many forms. The sitting quietly with yourself can be, in fact, terribly disturbing. It can be unhelpful. For someone who's highly agitated, they can just use that quiet moment to ruminate and get worse, you know, because they can't clear their mind and they're just going over. And then he said, and then I said, and then I wish I'd said, you know, all of that stuff, the noise in one's mind. And so to tell yourself I shouldn't be doing that becomes another source of, was mentioned before, judgment and failure, that I can't even meditate, that's how bad things are. So I think we've got to remember that meditation can mean many things. Sometimes people do a walking meditation, something that is active and being with the earth, and sometimes being out in nature, being actively engaged is a way to centre oneself. It's not always sitting on a cushion and, you know, in a darkened room, which is often what we hear about.
I'd just like to get to the next question, but there might be time after we finish. Thank you. Do we have a question? Yes, sir, if you'd like to stand up.
It's been a while since I've been called sir, but thank you. Just to follow from Greg's question, really, to look at it sort of in a clinical perspective, are we asking too much of this core beast or making too much of this core beast called mindfulness? Because once we start talking about bringing a theological perspective to it, or an interpretive perspective to it, it's no longer mindfulness. So the very nature of mindfulness in a clinical setting is just being in this present moment for this period of time and not doing anything much about it. And its impact then on the systems that Peter was talking about, the frontal lobe and the amygdala. When we then bring an overlay to that, I suspect it's no longer what we think it is. And are we asking too much of it when we ask, how will mindfulness help us die? If we use that as a yardstick, then penicillin's not going to be much use either. So I suppose my question is, are we putting too big a saddle on a small pony?
Okay, does it have its limitations? Thank you for the question. Who would like to have a go at that?
I guess I just spoke to that, so I feel I've had my turn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Father?
No.
Well, I mean, I guess I think of it as almost as two. I mean, there is mindfulness, and that has a role, and I see that while it has arisen largely from Buddhism, it has arisen from the meditation traditions, and it is usually applied in a secular sense. I'd agree, once you begin applying more to it, I think you are, in my mind, you're moving into what I call meditation, where you are then coming in contact with, as I've said, yourself and the greater reality of God. And I think that we tend to keep them separate. The group that I work with, Father Lawrence Freeman's group, separates meditatio, which is a secular meditation program, from the mantra meditation which we practice in a Catholic tradition. And we don't make any excuses about that. I think the scope of my view, this is the scope of mindfulness is perhaps limited. It does produce physiological, psychological effects, but I think there is another dimension, and I think that that other dimension, to my mind, is where meditation as such will take you. And I don't know what else.
We might just take one more question from the gentleman in the black there. Dan, I think you have.
I actually think you probably answered my question from Anthony's and a few others, but I'll ask it anyway.
Great, thank you.
At least two of you mentioned that the search for meaning is actually one of the more important things that we've lost. That mindfulness as the protocol is I guess, atheist, that there's no sort of underlying point of view. If that's the case, if we have lost sense of meaning, but the treatment is does not address that sense of meaning as the protocol, is it a band-aid solution? Do we need more to supplement the mindfulness treatment?
Yeah, so that's a great way to formulate the question as well, to kind of like bring all these things together. I think we can see that it's really important that we have these sort of two understandings of the transcendent and the immediate practice. And so you're absolutely right, it's limited and it falls short because the more time that we spend with our actual selves, we are these dynamic beings moving towards some ultimate truth. So if we're sitting with that, we're not static. We're not just a flower that we're looking at. When we're present with ourselves, we're going to discover that we need meaning. And so that's the problem with not having a contextualized worldview behind the practice of mindfulness. It might be great today, or this week, or even a whole year, as a practice that helps reduce anxiety. But if you keep doing it, you're going to have to answer the question, who am I? And that's where it brings us, it begs the question, it forces the question, and it makes us have to figure that out. Either, again, like I said, either this whole thing's an illusion, so stop asking the question, or there's a reason why it's okay to feel safe. And that's because there's a Father who loves us. And so that's, we need to have a place to bring it, absolutely. It can't be seen as just some sort of Band-Aid that's going to fix it forever.
Way to finish it. Any recommendations for people in the audience going through distress, or just any sort of any advice on your part would be wonderful.
Well, in terms of resources, I do have the course online available at CatholicMindfulness.com, and I have a book coming out. It's actually being released next week, so you can pre-order it on Amazon. It's called The Mindful Catholic. So you can look that up and pre-order it. And I basically go through what the 8-week protocol looks like in the context of Catholic faith. And it really is more than mindfulness. It's not just that. It's abandonment to divine providence. It's trustful, total surrender to God. And it's very Carmelite in its spirituality. That would be my recommendation.
Well, so I guess in terms of then the three different sort of organisational pathways that I'm involved with. So obviously there's Relationships Australia, there's one of us in every state and territory, which we offer a large range of services. So sometimes if you're really stuck and you're just not sure what to do, engaging with a helping professional to provide some wise guidance or a space to facilitate reflection is really helpful. And Relationships Australia has launched an online strategy called Radiant, and that's like a matching service for you to have your mental health needs more tailored and addressed. So you might just want to look at that. It's only just gone live, so it's an online kind of solution for that. And also I'm involved, as was mentioned, with the Ethics Centre. Sometimes if you feel that your concerns are of a more around ethical issues or there's an ethical dimension, they have a 1 hour free ethics counselling service where through a philosophical lens you might explore issues. And for people who like to think a bit outside the square or come at something from another angle, something that's on your mind, again, it's another source of wise counsel and reflection, a space to have a facilitated reflection that's even free. So they might be some opportunities too.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, look, for those who might be interested in exploring a meditation practice in the Catholic tradition, one place to go is it's the organisation I've referred to a couple of times, led by Lawrence Freeman currently, who's a Benedictine monk who lives in London. If you look up the World Community for Christian Meditation, wccm.com, that will lead you into an explanation of what that's about. They make, having sort of bagged communication and that before, they do send out, if you go on their website, a reflection, daily wisdom every day. I get it every morning and I read it before I do my morning meditation. But, and of course, there are the Carmelites.
Well, if you're interested in how Carmelites understand mindfulness, it flows out of that fundamental conviction of the divine indwelling, that God dwells within us and that we are called to live in the deepest possible friendship with God. If you're interested in exploring that, I would recommend you read Saint Teresa of Avila's writings. A good start would be Her Way of Perfection, the title of the book.
Thank you very much. So now can we please thank all of our panellists on Q&A. Stay tuned for more Q&A events coming up. We've got a big year this year. You can see everything that's happening by following us on Facebook at the Institute of Ethics and Society and www.nd.edu.au. Have a fantastic evening, everyone. Thank you very much.